Hello, everyone. It's your pal Chuck from the award-losing podcast Appalachia. Today, we have a fantastic interview for you. I hung out with a kick-ass Appalachian woman named Madison, but you probably know her by her online personality, xGigglypuff. Madison is great. She's an Appalachian. She's a Twitch streamer. She's a software engineer, an advocate for educational attainment. And look, if there was a Nobel Prize handed out for roasting misogynistic men on the internet, she would win it hands down. Because, you know, she gets a lot of insecure men harassing her because she commits the crime of being a woman on the internet. Anyway, her Twitter is worth following for that alone. Her story of going from rural Appalachia to the Ivy Leagues is very important. It's super impressive. We talk about that, how educational attainment is something that's super important to her and something she's passionate about. We talk about her background in software engineering, video games, and much more. There is something in this interview for everybody. So I hope that you enjoy it because I know that I did. Well, I would love to get started talking a little bit about, like, where you're from. If I recall correctly, was it Kentucky? Is that right, or am I wrong on that?
Yeah, I'm from Kentucky.
Okay, cool. I'd love for you to share, if you're willing, like a little bit about your background, where you grew up. And I know that you had this journey from going from Appalachia to the Ivy Leagues, and how that's probably a really fascinating transition. Would love to talk about all of that.
Yeah, so I grew up in an extremely rural, I think, area compared to like most of the United States, and a very low income area. And I was at a public school. I really enjoyed the experience, of course, but like I think every educational experience has its ups and downs. So, you know, in one way being like from a very small area and from a humble, I think, area, that I didn't grow up with the same attitude or like pressure. So a lot of my peers at Ivy Leagues grew up with. I think I was able to kind of like enjoy the classic American public high school experience, like playing sports, like doing fun things. Whereas when I talked to my peers, they, they spent their entire life just like studying, preparing for this moment to be at an Ivy League. And I never expected to be at an Ivy League. So I didn't really, I worked hard because I loved school, but I never kind of put those pressures on myself. So I think that was good. But then it also has its shortcomings with like a huge lack of access to educational opportunities.
Yeah.
Where, I didn't know computer science existed or study computer science until I got to Harvard, like my second year. And most of my classmates had been coding since they were like, not majority, but like a high percent had been coding and taking computer science since they were like 12-ish years old, some younger. All of them took it in high school. So I was and same with a lot of other STEM classes. So I was very underprepared for the experience. And I think the biggest shortcoming of it, and like the biggest issue that I really want to address in like the rural America, low income America, especially Appalachia, to, Ivy League and like higher achievement education pipelines, is that there is a huge, I think, attitude culturally, not necessarily by fault of the Appalachian people, but like externally, especially. And like, I think kids get this from authority figures and things like this, where like when I wanted to go to a school like Harvard, I think everyone was like, that's probably not going to happen, right? Like no one from here goes to those places. And 100%. You hear that a lot. I see that a lot online where people will be like, you need to stop lying to these poor kids from rural America. Like they're not going to, the odds that they go to someplace like Harvard is so low. I'm like, yeah, but like I was that kid and that's what I thought. And that's why I wasn't going to like try for more, right? And it's like, if you teach these kids that they're just so much less likely to do anything successful than people from other areas, then you end up with people. I went to school with people that are incredibly intelligent, just as intelligent as the people at Harvard, but weren't afforded like the same opportunities. And not like, oh, every single person I went to school with is just a genius. But I went to school with lots of people who could have gone on and done those things, and so it's a little bit like you end up with people who could contribute a lot to an Ivy League community and to society further on, who are not willing to put themselves out there because they are convinced by everyone around them that will not happen. So that's like I feel like that's the biggest thing for me.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. And in fact, when you were starting to talk about it, I almost felt like I could complete your sentence because I have experienced the same exact thing. And it's funny because When I was growing up, so I'm from Parkersburg, West Virginia, so right on the border of West Virginia and Ohio. Majority of people that graduated my high school either didn't go to college or went somewhere in West Virginia, including myself,
Yes, same.
because like in part because like we were told like not really told, but it was almost discouraged to kind of think outside of that box. And it's funny
Yes.
because even I specifically remember Harvard, Princeton, and UVA, University of Virginia, like did a joint I don't know what they call it, campus tours of like high schools in West Virginia and around Appalachia, trying to get people to apply because in like West Virginia they have a huge deficit of students from there. And even still, like I remember going back to some of my teachers or one of my advisors, and they're like, yeah, you kind of gonna temper expectations though, you know. I
Yeah.
mean, nothing wrong with WVU, which it's fine. It's where I went my first 2 years, but it's just like you're 100% right. It's almost like this expectation setting, and I wonder from your perspective. I think from mine it was well-meaning, well-intentioned,
Yes.
but wrong. I'm curious if yours was similar.
I have a lot to say on this. So I actually took part in a Harvard initiative to kind of recruit students from Appalachia during like my two of my years on campus during
Oh,
like winter
interesting.
breaks and other
Okay.
breaks. So they employed me and they employ a lot of people. They call it like their hometown recruiters to go back because you actually know the area. And someone
Yeah.
from Harvard who's like from a very different background speaking to those people, it just doesn't connect the same way, I think. And
Yeah.
they don't believe, like those kids still don't believe they could go there. So I go there, I'm like, hey, I'm from here. So I went all around Appalachia to these schools. And what I found was actually kind of mind blowing in some ways. For one, like a lot of kids got accepted to Ivy Leagues after I did that. Like there were several. There was one from my hometown that went to Harvard. There were several from just like the whole area that went to different Ivy Leagues after that, which was incredible because I was just one person going to these schools. And it's like, wow, it's crazy how capable these kids are when you actually give them the information that they need and like believe in them a little bit.
Yeah.
And so, but what I found that made me so upset, and they're very well-meaning people, like you said, it's not, but like none of the guidance counselors that I went to in high schools, like that their job is to do college readiness, like college applications, none of them knew how to apply to an Ivy League or how to tell a student if they came to them and said, I want to apply to an Ivy League. Not a single one knew. I got so many comments that were like, honey, like let's not even worry about that. Like that's not going to be our kids, you know. And they didn't know this, and I would remind them. I would say, no, I was one of your kids, and I did this, and I have friends that are some of your kids that do this, and you know, and very nicely, obviously, like I'm not gonna. I understand, like it's not really their fault, but it's like, hey, reminder, like that was me, and if you had said this to me, you know, I might not be where I am today. And I'm grateful that I didn't listen to people who said things like that to me. So I think like that was super important where they're just like, oh, it's not even necessary. Like we don't have anyone that'll get accepted there. And I'm like, hey guys, it's actually just the common application, the same application you fill out to state schools. It's so easy. You can apply for free. You can waive the fee if you get your guidance counselor to like sign a note saying that you can't afford it. Like you don't have to, you can just send the application out with all of your state schools. Just so I think for me, it's like, yes, someone might get disappointed, but a lot of kids in Appalachia that are poor have already been disappointed like a million times. It's so much better to just send out a free application and potentially get your college paid for and like, you know, move up economically so much than it is to like maybe hear a rejection.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Well, you mentioned getting it paid for, and that was something else I wanted to ask you because I know you shared on Twitter about how Harvard has a certain financial aid program. I'm sure the other Ivy League schools do as well, to where if you're from like an indigent background, you can potentially get it paid for. And I'm thinking back now to when those schools visited when I was in high school. And I don't remember, they probably said something about that. I don't know. I don't really remember. But I think I had it in my head at the time too. Like, even if I could get into one of these schools, there's no way that I could pay for this, and I'm not going to put that on my parents. And so I didn't have that information of like, oh, like there is real financial aid available for this. I'm curious about how you found out about that and what that experience was like. And I also want to step back real quick and ask you how you ended up even deciding to apply to go to Harvard in the first place.
Yeah, so I can tell the story there. So I actually, you know, I remember mentioning when I was like a sophomore in high school. They were like, oh, if you could go to any college, what would be your dream college? And we went around the room in a science class. And I had never thought about it before, even though, and a lot of kids that go to places like Harvard think about it from the moment they're 4 years old, right? So I was in high school, like late high school, I never thought about it. And I was like, oh, if I could go anywhere, I'd want to go to the best school. Like I'd want to go to the school where I could learn the most and I could learn everything. And I was very hungry for knowledge because like I didn't have those opportunities where I was at. So I was like, okay, I'd go to Harvard. And of course, like the kids in there were like, haha, yeah, so yeah, that's so funny, And I remember asking like guidance counselors and teachers, and they're like, they're not trying to be mean, but they're like, oh, I don't know how to do that. Just like look it up or whatever kind of thing. Whereas they're instructing us directly how to fill out applications to our local community college and like really pushing that. And I understand that's what the majority of students are going to do. And that's whatever. But, I do think, so from that point, I kind of had to figure all this out on my own. And I'm very glad that I did. So I was, just like reading about it. And it's like, okay, if you make this amount of money, when I was graduating, it was, if your family made less than $65,000 a year, you went completely free. Okay.
Wow.
And I was well below that line. So that's, and even in my year, 65,000 to like 150,000 would pay like 0 to 10% of like, it's just like you get financial aid up to like 450K a year income. You get some form of financial aid. And this is from Harvard specifically. So I kind of just learned that on my own and was like, okay, this is big. But then I just put it on the back burner. It was like, okay, I probably won't get into a school like Harvard. I focused on state schools. I was considering like Center College and the University of Louisville and working on scholarships for full rides to those schools. And at the last minute, about the night before all of the Ivy League applications were due, I submitted a bunch. I submitted the same app, the Common App, and just filled out the individual questions, like edited my essays a little bit, and I submitted them because I was just like, well, why not? If I don't do this, I will regret it. But I did not expect to get accepted at all. And when I look back now, I feel so crazy because I was well above average for like all of the stats for all that average Harvard admit. So I was just like well above their standards, and also super disadvantaged from a background like Appalachia and like rural low income. But I also totally believe that there's no shot that I was like capable of getting accepted. So I know, like I can picture how kids that are like, even if you make perfect standardized test scores, perfect GPA, like valedictorian, like this is like what I was looking at. And I thought there was no way I could get into a place like Harvard. And that's crazy. That's crazy, right? So I think that really shows, and I think I'm a generally pretty confident person. So I think that shows just kind of like how affected people are by like the cultural stereotypes. And yeah, I heard back a few months later that I got accepted everywhere that I applied. And I was just like shocked. Yeah, I was completely shocked. I got a phone call. And this is a story that I haven't really told to people online, but it's not like a secret. I got a phone call when I was at tennis practice from a Harvard admissions representative. And they were like, hey, like, can we talk to you for a minute? And this is so weird because so they only do personal phone calls and personal letters to like their top people, like the top people that they want to accept. So I got what's called a likely letter, which is like their top priority, top 100 or something people that they want to attend the school. So they call me and they're like, we want to make sure you go to Harvard. What can we do? Like, what can we offer kind of thing? And they have like a really long, like in-depth phone call about how good of an applicant I am. And I just bawled my eyes out on like the tennis court for like an hour. Sure. I drove straight to my friend's house, like my best friend's house, like across the street. And then we cried. She was like, I'm not surprised at all. And I'm like, how are you not surprised? So it was a huge shocker for me to expecting no chance of getting accepted to any of these, submitting it at the last minute, and then even getting a likely letter from like Harvard and Yale and getting accepted to everywhere that I applied. So that is like kind of my story. And it's not really to brag. It's kind of just like, I feel like it's important to see how much this impacts people. And I didn't believe in myself at all. And I had a few teachers at a summer program that I went to that were like, yeah, of course you could go to a place like that. And I hung on to that in the back of my mind when I decided to apply, or I wouldn't have.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that because I think it's really important for people to hear. I mean, like I mentioned, I didn't know anything about the financial aid aspect of Ivy League schools, especially for people with low income backgrounds, which my family
Yeah.
would have absolutely qualified for that as well. And thinking of like how how much in some ways you're reared to believe that you're disadvantaged when you grow up in Appalachia, because I mean in reality you are,
Yes.
but to not like to believe that maybe you can't strive for anything you want, and I think that's
Hmm.
really the difference. So I'm really glad that you shared that. I'm glad that you worked as an ambassador for the school, because I think it's really important for people to hear from people that are actually from these places, like, yes, you can go to one of these schools, you can pursue whatever you want. And that brings me to a question, because I know that you mentioned that you didn't have any exposure to computer science before going to Harvard. Was that originally your major that you intended to major in? Because I know you're a software engineer now. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so did you always want to do that, or did you discover that passion once you got there?
I didn't know it existed, yeah, until I got to Harvard. I think I've learned now, and in like going back and stuff, that there is a huge technology drought, a huge technology education drought in the Appalachian area. Like computer science isn't offered in any of the schools near
Mm-hmm.
me. You know, it would be like 2+ hours of a drive of a commute to even get offered a computer science course, even now that computer science is so popular. So imagine back then, you know. So I actually changed my major a lot. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to do something STEM related because I really liked math, but I also really like other things, you know. So I just really like learning. I think I'm a jack of all trades, master of none, unfortunately. But
Feel that.
yeah, you feel it. So I took like some mathematics courses at the beginning, and I was coming in, I think, applied mathematics, and I was going to apply it to some sort of field. And I took my first computer science course and I loved it. I was such a nerd about it because I love problem solving. I love puzzles. And it's like, wait, you can kind of problem solve, like solve these puzzles, solve these logic puzzles, and build something that people can use and enjoy. So to me, that was just like groundbreaking, with
Mm-hmm.
something that I definitely knew I wanted to do after college. Even if I didn't, I ended up switching my major a few times and doing a double major with psychology and computer science. But I wanted to learn as much as I could in college. But I knew that like afterwards, at least for some time, I wanted to build cool software. And my first computer science course is actually really good. It's offered completely free online by like the Harvard professor, and I've recommended it to several of my friends who don't have access to comp sci education. I've tried to bring it to some high schools in the Appalachian area because it is like online and free. We'll see how that goes, but it is really really good. It's very accessible for people who have not done computer science, and it's harder. Like I think it's harder to get a good grade and it's harder to succeed, but you can learn a lot as it's designed for like complete people that are completely new to computer
Mm-hmm.
science. And our first assignment was building like a mini video game, and I love games, and I had the most fun with this assignment. I spent like way more time than other people did because I was just having so much fun. I built like this mini catch platform game to where it's Colonel Sanders and he's like moving. You can move him up and down and whatever and left and right and catching chicken in his bucket. He's catching fried chicken and he's dodging vegetables or he loses lives.
Mm-hmm.
And when like it jumps, it's like the sound. I'm like yeehaw, yeehaw. You know, it's
I love
so
that.
funny. So I had so that was my first computer science assignment ever. So I had so much fun. I was like, okay, dead set. I will be doing this. This is fun. And I had actually like one of my roommates from San Francisco, from a very good private school there. She was like asking me when I was so shocked about how much I loved computer science. She was like, "Wait, how did you think computers worked? Did you think there was just a little man in there pushing buttons for you?" I'm like, I mean, I practically knew nothing more than that. I was like, I did not know code exists. I did not know how computers work. Like it was all complete mysticism to me. You couldn't have. So
Yeah.
that's how little I knew.
I mean, that checks out. I don't know how things may have changed in my high school since I graduated, but I mean, like keyboarding wasn't even a required course; it was an elective, which is
Yes.
wild to me that that wouldn't be required. I'm sure it is now. I hope, but it is true that there's such a huge technology information gap and just an
Mm-hmm.
opportunity gap with that.
Yeah.
I would have like I loved games when I was in high school. I mean, I still do. And I loved computers. I knew nothing about them, and I would have loved to have that opportunity. But yeah, the most exposure I got is my sister's ex-boyfriend, who's still a good family friend, was like naturally just insanely talented in that and would write code. I don't know how he learned, but now he works for like Amazon or something. But that was my only exposure to it. I'm like, oh, this guy's just a genius. Okay, well, that's how it works. It's magic. Great. But that's really interesting, and I would be curious to get your thoughts on how do you fix the technology drought in places like Appalachia, or maybe a better question would be how do you change things to where more kids that are growing up there would be able to have these opportunities?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I feel like on one hand, I do think that it is improving, maybe not at the places it should, but like with the digital age and social media and stuff like that, and everyone being online so much, especially after the pandemic. There's a lot of negative side effects, I think, with like mental health and socialization, of course, but there's also maybe it's not a net benefit, but I think there's also a side effect of a lot of kids growing up, even in super rural areas, are very tech savvy. Or more so than we were. Like they don't even, because like when I was in school, like we didn't use computers in classes like people do at other schools, right? Like we didn't have that. We write things down on pencil and paper, you know, and kids these days, like I feel like they don't even need a keyboard in class. Like they all use computers. They use them for everything. They all use iPads. They all use just like all these technologies. Like there would never be, when I was, I think, graduating, like I didn't know how to use like a GPS, like maps app. Like there were like skills that I adjusted that kids, I think, will never have to these days, will never have any sort of, it's almost like secondhand nature to them. So I think that's one positive. And I think that partially because of that, like a computer science educational program would do really well in rural areas now, where it may not have done as well in the past. And I kind of think the safest bet, like the best place to start, is with education and offering things like, if you offered things like computer science in these schools, like there would be people who would come to the area with this opportunity. I think like I've had discussions with people and talked about, okay, well, should there be like a big tech company like come to the area with jobs? And I think it's risky because if you have a place like Amazon open up a big office in Appalachia, they're all making insane amounts of money, and the rent drives up to the point where people can't afford to live there anymore, right?
Gentrify, so I think it the hell out of the place.
Yeah, it has to be done carefully. You can't just plop Amazon in Appalachia. I mean, people are going to suffer dramatically. It's not, but you know, so I think that the safest bet to start is educating people and hoping. I think that like hometown people, like locals, will open up businesses. And I know that I did work at a startup that was in, like, I was remote, but it was in the Kentucky, Ohio area, and it was extremely successful just because they didn't have access to that. And that's even in like northern Kentucky, like Cincinnati area. There's still like a tech drought. Like there's all through the Midwest and even like bigger cities. There's not tech jobs like there are in Silicon Valley, New York City, Boston, like these hubs. Like there's still not a lot of like good tech jobs in a lot of these areas. So even places like that, I think if you do get people that start startups or start companies or kind of these things that are local, it would actually help people, I think, a lot more than just importing a tech company. So I feel like the best bet is starting with a computer science education program. And even if it doesn't start up a tech company in Appalachia, those kids will be given opportunity to like go and do those things and make good money and build cool things elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I completely agree on that, especially like you can't just airdrop an Amazon HQ2 in, I don't know, Pike County and hope that things go well. It's not realistic. I do think, though, like the smaller business approach and like some of the startup approach, I think makes a lot of sense. And they've tried that in places like outside of Appalachia. Like Nashville has leaned into that a lot. I used to live in Nashville for about 5 years. And want to move back. I miss that place a ton. and then Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is in Appalachia, even though it's not a small town, they've really leaned into like bringing in companies that can provide high speed internet, so that they can have like that tech startup culture. And I think that the more that you can proliferate access to things like high speed internet, if Starlink is able to become affordable at some point and not run by an ideologue, then there's definitely opportunities there. But yeah, I think it starts with education. I think it's a really good point. And I think there's some companies that are starting to do that, or starting to invest in schools to be able to do that. But I definitely think it needs more investment for sure in the region. I wanted to ask you, because I know that we've been going for probably about 25 minutes. I wanted to pivot to some of your extracurricular stuff that you mentioned, because not only have you got exposed to computer science, but now like you do streaming, I'm guessing on the side, not as your principal form of income. But I'm curious how you got into that, and was that because you stream on Twitch, so was it because you were really into gaming? I'm curious about that. I'm just curious about your interests around that.
Yeah, it was. I always grew up playing video games, and I really liked video games. And I loved the GameCube. The GameCube is like my entire childhood. I feel
Underrated.
It's so good. I'm obsessed with GameCube games. And then I think when I got to like high school, I played a little bit, but I didn't play as much. So I was so busy with extracurriculars. So I did like cheerleading, tennis, academic team. I did like some service stuff. So I was always very busy and I didn't get to. And same for early college. Like I really just didn't have time to enjoy. Like I didn't watch TV shows either, right? Like I just didn't have time for things I just enjoyed just for fun. And so then like later in college, then like as I got less busy and then the pandemic hit, I was like, I have all this time to go back to playing video games. So at first, obviously a lot of bad things happened, but the one positive was I got a lot of time to read books, watch shows, play video games. And then I was kind of like playing a lot of games, and my brother kept being like, why don't you just stream? And I'm like, oh, I can't do that. Like, and he's like, why don't you just stream? You're playing games all day anyways. Like, why don't you try it? He's like, I feel like you'd really like it, because I'm a very social, extroverted person. But I guess it's the same with Harvard. I just never considered it. But then once I did, I was like, oh yeah, this makes perfect sense. And so I I started up a stream on like a really, really bad computer with like a $10 webcam or something from Amazon. It was just like very scuffed, but I was having so much fun doing old Pokemon Nuzlocke and like old retro Pokemon playthroughs to like five people for a while. And it saved me. It was my social time. So I'm a very social person, and we're all locked in our houses for the pandemic. So I was like, oh wait, I love talking to people that also like the same games as me. And I actually get to, so it was, I think it was helpful, like a replacement for like in real life constantly being out with people. And I got to meet like a lot of cool people. And from there, I've just, kept doing it. I feel like I really enjoy it, and I kind of just do it on my own schedule at this point. Like if I don't have time, then it's no big deal, it's not my job. But if I do get time and I want to play a game, or I want to like talk to my chat and discuss things, I'm like, oh, I can just turn it on and talk to a lot of people that have similar interests to me. And I think I have a very good community. As you can tell on Twitter, I think I get rid of people who have very negative or toxic viewpoints. I'm very into, positive, helping other people. And I think I scare off all the others, which is good. So my community is very fun to talk to and to play games with. So I feel like it's just a huge benefit to my social life. And I started playing video games, but at this point, as I've gotten like more and more into Twitch, I kind of like can do programming on there and do like game development and like discuss like current topics, and I think like bring forth like some good discourse and like conversation in just what's going on around the world, and like books and random cool topics. So I have a lot of very smart and like very cool people in my community. So I feel like that is exactly something that just seems like a huge benefit to life to me. So
yeah, that's interesting. You stream programming. I think that's a really great idea. I didn't think about the connection between that and the pandemic. That is so true. And I don't
Yeah.
know. We've been doing this podcast since 2019, so a little bit before that, which is not streaming, but it's building an online community. And it's actually kind of ironic how you can really build a legitimate, like, real community of people through something that's almost entirely online.
Yeah.
It's really interesting how our world has evolved with that. But yeah, I was like pleasantly surprised about that because I work remotely, and so I'm not interacting with people all day, which is kind of driving me crazy. But it is
Yeah.
like a reprieve to be able to get on and just like talk with people who have similar interests.
hmm
Um,
Yeah, it's a huge bonus of like the social media era, I think, as well.
oh yeah. With the time remaining, I did want to ask you about like what games are you playing now? What are some of your favorites? Where's you mentioned the GameCube, which is a great console. I would probably put the N64 over that one, but I have a lot of nostalgia tied to that from being like a kid and that being one of the first things that I actually started playing a lot on. But I'm interested in like what are some of your favorites and what you're into right now.
Yeah, so my favorite game of all time is Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door on the GameCube. I don't know if
Oh,
you've ever
nice.
played it,
Yeah.
but I'm obsessed with it. I love it so much. I could talk about it for hours, so that's a different episode. But I love that, and I really, really love Zelda games. I love Zelda: Ocarina of Time and Breath of the Wild so much. I know they're from very different eras, but I think they're both just like have redefined
Phenomenal.
gaming and are just such monumental and amazing experiences, especially for like the times they release. So those are kind of like, and I love some old Pokemon games like Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Diamond and Pearl, Emerald, like Fire Red and Leaf Green. I love those a lot. Those are kind of my favorites of all time. Currently, I've been playing some indie games. There's like an indie game called Bug Fables that I'd recently played kind of off stream in my own time. And I've been playing Baldur's Gate. I still have not beaten my first playthrough, but Baldur's Gate 3 because I work so much. But I if I get like a weekend to sit down and play it for a few hours, I'm hoping to get through it at some point, and I've been really enjoying it.
Everybody has recommended that to me, and I haven't played that one yet because my favorites right now and for a while have been just like sandbox RPGs, pretty much ones that are like as long and arduous as possible. Um, but I agree with you on Zelda. Those are some absolute masterpieces. Ocarina of
Yeah,
Time, especially. What was your thoughts on Tears of the Kingdom? Like
I
the
liked
most.
it. I love Tears of the Kingdom. I think like just like what they did with the physics system is like a technological marvel,
Yeah.
and it's just a I think it's a marvel like of a work in gaming in general, but I don't think it's quite as good as Breath of the Wild. I think upon reflection, people Breath of the Wild stuck with people for years. I mean, like everyone played that for so long, and it had such an impact. And I think the story was a bit better. Like the lore didn't really connect with Tears of the Kingdom, and I think people were just like it was awesome, but I don't think it was quite what Breath of the Wild was. While I think it was like incredible, and it may have been a better game if Breath like the best Zelda game if Breath of the Wild had never came out, or it may have been up there. But
Yeah.
I think it is not as good as Breath of the Wild. Maybe hot take.
No, I think that's fair. I agree with you on the lore, and I think that the game design is an absolute masterpiece, hands
Yes.
down. I was blown away because I like Breath of the Wild is incredible, and it was such a deviation from the franchise where they did it
Yeah.
more open world, which I love. And I remember Tears of the Kingdom coming out and being like, oh, it's in the same like map, universe, whatever. Like, how is it still going to be good? But it was fucking phenomenal.
Yeah, it
Um,
is.
but I agree with you. I think that those two, especially together, are just incredible. Like, I don't know. I guess Miyamoto is the guy behind all that, and he's just an absolute genius.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a machine. That is crazy.
that is someone who I know he doesn't do many interviews, and there would be absolutely no reason for him to come on our podcast at all. But that was just somebody that I would love to, and aside from the obvious language barrier, I would love to just talk to him and understand like his creative process because it's so. My not as hot take, well, maybe it is among some people, is I think video games are some of the best vehicles for storytelling that exist.
Yeah, I think so as well.
Because so I have ADHD. I grew up with it, whatever. But so sitting down and reading a book sometimes can be more challenging than others. But like the way that some of these games tell intricate stories is really powerful. And I know I'm going on a tangent here, but I don't know if you play any of the Bethesda games at all, like
I
Fallout or.
haven't.
Okay, well,
I
I
want
am.
to.
You should. I'm.
Hmm.
They're. I would put them over almost anything just by raw storytelling alone
Yeah.
because the lore is so intricate. It's like it's almost like if you took Game of Thrones as like a lore machine and threw it into a video game world universe. Like it's that extensive, and it's just really it's incredible storytelling. I think is where I land on it. So that's why I really love those games because they have lore that stretches decades from the franchise beginning until now, and it's all tied together very neatly. And then with Bethesda, with Fallout, now they have a TV show that is also tied into the lore and is
I
canon
watched the
to the
show.
lore.
I
You
love the
did.
show.
It's
Yeah, I really want
fantastic.
to play the games. Wait, what game would you recommend that I start with? Because this is kind of where I'm hung up.
Well, that's a great question.
Hmm.
Glad that you watched the show. It's fantastic. I loved Ella Purnell in that. She's and Walton Goggins are both amazing.
Yes.
Walton Goggins, great Appalachian from Georgia. Um,
Hmm.
I I don't think that there's a wrong place to start. I think Fallout 76 is like an online version. It's an online game, but like there's story to it, and it takes place in Appalachia, so that's always a good one. But I don't know. I mean, the really snooty people will say that Fallout New Vegas, is probably their favorite.
Mm.
It was designed by a different developer, Obsidian, but it had Bethesda sign off and everything. My first one that I played was New Vegas. It's really good. I think 4 is really good. It's really fun. Those are great. So honestly, you can't go wrong with any of them. Um, and they have like the number 1 and 2, which came out in the 90s, I think. So if you really want like a retro experience, you can go with them. But I mean, this is probably a terrible answer. I don't think there's a bad choice.
Yeah. Yeah. No, what I keep hearing. So it's hard to decide when you have like several that like could be good. It's like where do you dive in at? I was just thinking about this though. It would be very cool to do like an episode or a talk about kind of like Appalachian video games. I know you guys have the way I found you all in the first place is I have some people from like my hometown that follow you and like listen to your podcast and stuff, but I saw shared a graphic of like Appalachian authors and like films
Hmm.
and books. And I was like, this is amazing. Like, I love this so much. It's an amazing graphic. And I was like, we should put together a video game one
Yeah,
at some
absolutely.
point. That would
I would
be
love
very
that.
cool.
I would
Yeah.
love
Because I was
that.
like, I bet there's a lot of, I know there's like an indie game that was like with Kentucky in the title that won several awards, but I didn't end up playing it. I don't know if like the developers are from Appalachia, but I bet if we did a deep dive that we could find some cool stuff there.
Yeah, I honestly have never thought of that, but I think that's a fantastic idea, and I'm sure that there are. I think I know which game you're talking about with Kentucky because I've seen it pop up on
Yes.
like Steam or whatever.
Yeah.
And I can't think of it either, but I keep seeing it because I like some of those indie ones. Like I
Yeah,
don't
I
know if you
love
ever
indie
played
games.
Firewatch. That was
I
one
haven't
of
played that one.
it was very much just narrative based, kind of
Hmm.
like Edith Finch and some of those other ones. But it's just really fun storytelling. It's really interesting and immersive. Yeah, I would love to do that. I'd love to
Yeah.
figure out who those people are.
It'd be very cool to spotlight some of like the Appalachian indie game devs. I feel like those are very, like individual creatives, like artists. It'd be very cool to see what they're up to.
Yeah,
I just sparked this idea myself as well.
no, this is great. And if you come across any, let me know. I'm totally down for that. I would love to spotlight that. Anything like that, like game devs or anybody that's doing anything interesting in like the tech space. Would love to talk with them.
Yeah, I'll shoot you some DMs if I find anything. I'll have to put out a tweet and see if we can gather any intel or something and ask around.
I'm sure they're out there. I'm positive.
Hmm.
Well, cool. This was a great conversation. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you wanted to talk about before we wrap?
No, I feel like, with the similar backgrounds and just like places where we're at in life, we could probably, have long conversations about anything. But I feel like we touched on like the most important things I enjoyed it.
Cool. Awesome. I did too. I think especially the conversation around like your journey to Ivy League school and how there's barriers, but there's barriers that can be solved with that, I think is really interesting and makes for a really great conversation. And I also think that it is a great contrast to JD Vance, who always talks about how he went to Ivy League school but hasn't done anything to really help the region that he's from. So I
Yes.
appreciate that, and I think that you're a great contrast to that. So
Thank you.